A great way to get more English speaking practice is to start your own podcast. Spotify for Podcasters makes it so easy to record, edit, and distribute your podcast right from your phone or computer. So, no matter what your setup is like, or how much experience you have or don't have, you can start creating today. Not only is it simple, it's totally free. I decided to start my podcast with Spotify, and it's helped me reach hundreds of thousands of people. So download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
Welcome to Business English with Tanya. In today's episode of the podcast, we're going to learn 10 expressions that will help you interrupt with confidence at work. It might seem small because they're really just tiny expressions, but how you say it in addition to what you say are really going to help you elevate your executive presence. You're going to be able to contribute and participate in a way that's accepted, that's perceived with authority and perceived with respect. Let's take a look over here at a free audio training. So make sure you go to tanyasuarez.com/lead to download your free training of the 3 essentials of American leadership communication. So that's going to build on the skills that you learned today. The first expression we have here is let me pause you there for a moment. Now, if you just deliver it robotically, let me pause you there for a moment. That's going to actually sound either intimidating, or if you're not speaking up, if you're not really giving that presence, it's going to be easy to ignore. So first, let's do the body language. If it's a virtual meeting, you really just need to worry about this body language. If it's in person, it's going to be a little bit more. So here, sometimes just lifting a finger, not pointing because that's going to look aggressive, but just lifting or maybe just kind of moving up, doing a little sign like that. Let me pause you there for a moment. Say it slowly because you're interrupting someone. You want to draw their attention back to the moment and back to you. So if you say it fast, if your goal is, I want to sound fluent like a native speaker, and you increase your speed, you're actually lowering the efficiency of the interruption. So you want to do it slowly and clearly. Let me pause you there for a moment. So I would emphasize there. Let me pause you there for a moment. I want to ask you more about those numbers. Or let me pause you there for a moment. Before you continue, I want to make sure we talk about this quarter's blah, blah, blah. Now for the pronunciation, because I love advanced pronunciation, notice the linking and the reduction. For a sounds like fura. Let me pause you there for a moment. Good. Because as you're in higher levels, you've been speaking English at work for years, probably if you're following me. Now you get to really refine it. So you sound not only with more authority and with more confidence, but also more natural. The next expression, before we move forward. Again, if you're just trying to interrupt before we move forward, people are going to look at you like, is she mad? Is he okay? So it's the tone, the intonation, really. Before we move forward, you want to drag these interruption phrases out a little bit because remember, you're interrupting someone. They're trying to remember what they're saying in their presentation or their argument, depending on the context. So this is to help people get quiet first so they can hear you well. If you rush into what you're actually trying to interrupt to say, they're not going to hear it as well. And it really kills the communication and the elevated communication. So before we move forward, so you want to be calming, pause a little bit, make sure you have everyone's attention. That pause is going to help you command the room. And it's sometimes the pauses do more than any phrase that you could possibly use. So before we move forward, I'm going to keep that low. You're not going to uptick. So before we move forward, you're going to keep it down, confident. Before we move forward, let's take a look at those numbers again. So you're pausing, you're getting attention, you're making sure your eyes are on you. Next one. Excuse me, may I interject for a moment? So notice when I say it like that with no strategic pauses, no emphasis, it's easy to overlook. And if you're listening to this, you're in a point in your career where you want to command attention. You're not, the entry level person who's nervous about speaking up. You're the person people look to for solutions. So a way to do this, excuse me. Now this one, I'm laughing because one of my clients was a CEO for a tech company, and he was Russian, and his delivery was so aggressive. And we would laugh about it because he's like, I know. He's like, the thing is, when I'm talking to my Russian partners, like, this is how we communicate, and like everybody just matches and escalates. And I'm like, I hear you. But at this point, when he came to me, we were really working on him understanding the American market more and having meetings with Americans. I'm like, you want to change that tone in order to connect more effectively. So instead of, excuse me, may I you're going to take it down. You're going to trust that your presence and all the executive presence techniques that you're working on are going to help you command the room without screaming, without sounding like what I call angry father voice. So you really want to be calm. Calmness is leadership. To me, calmness is effective leadership. Again, you create an environment of safety, you create an environment of inspiration. But back to this. Excuse me, may I interject for a moment? You're going to pause. You're not waiting for an answer because it's a rhetorical question, especially if you're the one in the leadership position. But this is polite. So notice the difference. Excuse me, may I interject for a moment? I'd be like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? Excuse me, may I interject for a moment? You could also say, if I may interject. So if you want to make it a sentence, excuse me, if I may interject for a moment, looking at that data, I would say blah, blah, blah. Again, notice how I slowly introduce this interruption because it's about making sure you have everyone's attention. This is where you develop executive presence. It's for you as a non-native speaker. Yes, it's about the English words, but from a leadership perspective, the delivery is what sets your reputation. It's what sets you up for effective communication. Next one. Listen, I appreciate your thoughts on that, but let's circle back to it later. So notice how I slow down on the listen, because again, someone else is talking. You want to get them to stop talking and to be receptive to you. Here, this is a really great one when if you're in a meeting and that somebody's gone on a tangent or off the agenda, or other things are discussed that you're not ready to present on and you want to keep the meeting focused, this is a really great way to do it. It's going to sound rude if you're like, listen, I appreciate your thoughts on that, but let's circle back to that later. Or, listen, I appreciate your thoughts on that, but let's circle back to that later. The focus for this meeting really needs to stay on blah, blah, blah. Or let's circle back to that later. The most important thing to focus on for now is this. It's a totally different vibe. So a really great way for you to do this, and I'll include the notes for all of these expressions. Practice saying them, emphasize different words, play around with how slowly, so like the first word should be versus how the pausing should feel like. You want to actually feel it come out of your mouth. A big part of this kind of training, remember, you're not a student. You actually have to use these words and these techniques. So you need to practice the movement. It would be the equivalent of watching somebody dancing and thinking that if you watch that video over and over again, your body's going to dance when you need it to. No, you need to create that muscle memory. You need to feel how you're going to feel, your heart rate, your breath. These are all things that are very important because when you interrupt, especially if you're nervous from a language perspective, if you're still kind of in that mindset of, oh, my pronunciation, or all these other colleagues are native speakers, you're going to feel your heart rate increase. So part of your training is visualizing that you have 20 other people that you're going to interrupt. Feel the nerves, feel the anxiety, feel the heart rate, breathe. And as you're saying this, you're going to train yourself to work through that anxiety so that all they see is calm confidence. And this is why leadership training for non-native speakers is different. There is a different level there. There are different challenges where your leadership skills might actually be really good, but they're not translating, or you have these other moments that are decreasing the efficacy. But you got this. Just takes a lot of practice and strategy. All right, so the next one, if I may, I want to dig deeper into this before we move on. So if I may, that's a really great one. You can use that to interrupt anytime, but it's how you say it. If I may, sounds like you're about to give a speech in 1910. So you want to modernize it. You want to be casual. If I may. So here we have connected speech linking. So it's not if I may, if I may, you're going to pause there a little bit. You're not waiting for a response. You're waiting for them to stop talking. You're giving them a chance to give you the full attention. If I may, and for confidence, you want to push your, for me, I tend to lean back if it's a thought that I'm contributing, but you want to play around with what's genuine to you. So another option is also bring your shoulders up. If I may, I want to dig deeper into this before we move on. So here you could say I want to, if you're articulating the T's. I wanna, if you're completely reducing it into an informal contraction. I want to dig deeper. I want to. You're not going to pronounce the two T's. Part of my advanced pronunciation training is teaching you blending. When we have the end of a word that sounds the same as the beginning of a word, the American pronunciation tendency is to blend, so you're only going to pronounce it once. Instead of I want to, I want to. There's only one T. I want to dig deeper into this before we move on. Move on. So there we have linking for connected speech. Von. So these are all really fascinating. This is where your training's different. You're doing advanced pronunciation to help you sound smoother, which is going to help you sound less robotic, which is going to make you sound a lot more confident. So this is where pronunciation, it's not about having perfect English, but it's about helping your English sound genuine to you and your voice. Because a lot of times you might feel more robotic or more formal, but that's because you're trying to use C2 level sentence structure because you think that's showing how good your English is. But really it's about finding the structures that are the most natural and that in the context of the communication that you're in, the meetings, your industry, the structure that actually helps you implement changes, inspire people, get things done. Next one, sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to explore blah, blah, blah. So here, again, bring yourself up, physically interrupt as you're interrupting verbally. Because if you're just, especially in a virtual meeting, if you don't move, it's going to be really hard for the eyes to see where the voice is coming from. Because look at this. Sorry to interrupt. It's like, who said that? Is anyone interrupting? So you're going to actually move into the screen. So these are virtual executive presence. If you just stand still. Sorry to interrupt. Or 1 moment. Sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to explore blah, blah, blah. So you've got the visual, so eyes can see where they should be paying attention. You have the moment to help them quiet down. So you could say, excuse me, if I may, sorry to interrupt. This isn't about actually apologizing. It's about politely giving space for them to quiet down. And then you're going to breathe. You're not going to rush into it. Sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to explore last quarter's data before we move on. So now the strategy. Excuse me, sorry to interrupt, but I'd like to explore last quarter's data before we move on to next quarter. So it's still calm. I tend to be a lot more energetic, but if that's not you, that's okay. You're going to play around and find the intonation that feels genuine to you, but you're going to practice the pausing, the physical cues that are going to help you communicate more effectively while being authentic to yourself. And here for let me see, any pronunciation, a lot of reductions. So we talked about reductions in our last lunch and learn. Instead of to. So sorry to interrupt. And a lot of times we eat the first T and interrupt. Americans will eat that a lot. So instead of interrupt, it's going to sound like sorry to interrupt, kind of like internet, but Americans eat that first T a lot, internet. So sorry to interrupt. But I'd like to explore to. So these are those little moments, but they really make your English smoother if the American accent is your goal. Next one. I hear what you're saying, Let's focus on this for now. Can you tell me about so here I just gave you a little bit more of the dialogue or this part of the dialogue for you to practice. So I hear what you're saying. That's a polite way of like I hear you, but no. And this is really great if maybe someone's bringing up a part of the issue that is not meant to be addressed in this meeting. This could be if someone's going off on a tangent and talking about something that you don't want to distract the meeting with. So the intonation can help you either sound rude or polite because it's different. Like, I hear what you're saying. Let's focus on this for now, though. That sounds exasperated. It sounds like you don't take that person seriously, and maybe you don't, but you never want to put that out there. I like to remind you that you just don't know where people are coming from, and at the end of the day, whether you like the people or not is not the prerogative. The prerogative is to create an environment where people feel open, but they also have the respect to stay in line and to follow your directives. So another option here. So notice the stop. So for this one, because you want them to stop. In this case, I like to use this expression for redirecting. So you're not going to point, because again, that's aggressive. I don't really love the 2-finger point. But in this case, a subtle stop, not a stop, but here, kind of lower. I hear what you're saying. So your body cue is saying stop. Your mouth and your intonation is saying we're calmly redirecting. I hear what you're saying. You can use a sentence like this, or you can add a little bit. However, so I hear what you're saying. However, let's focus on production for now. Can you tell me about our distributors and blah, blah, blah? So again, you're giving them time because they're going to react defensively. Maybe they're also having their own anxiety or their own defensiveness. So you're diffusing that before escalating, before planting the seeds of resentment. This is where the diplomacy comes in. So I hear what you're saying. However, let's focus on production for now. Let's focus on production for now. So you're still keeping kind of that deep register, which is very authoritative, but calming. Because again, it's different. I hear what you're saying, but let's focus on production for now. Oh my gosh, that would just kill me. Because again, you want to lift people, or at least for me, the way that I like to coach leadership, it's about lifting people, but you also need structure and you need focus. So I hear what you're saying. Let's focus on production for now. Can you tell me about the distribution? Da, da, da. So this is where you can also look in the mirror. You can record yourself. I find that recording yourself, whether it's on the phone or webcam, that helps. If you're not comfortable seeing yourself, it makes you see yourself. A tip that I'm going to share in next week's Lunch and Learn is record yourself doing these. And then when you watch it, put it on mute, because that's going to help you see what people see, because your physical executive presence, your physical nonverbal communication is a big deal. And that's something that you don't even have to worry about the English component. So just your body language is going to be a really helpful way for you to elevate your communication. Next one, let's put a pin in that for now and come back to it later if we have time. Okay, so let's play around with intonation. Let's put a pin in that thought for now, come back to it later if we have time. That's not really leadership. That's more just rudeness. All right. So here I'm visualizing, which is what I want you to do. You've got a lot of people talking about different things. It's getting a little chaotic. Maybe a topic was brought up that's a little controversial or just not something that you're prepared to address in this meeting, but you want to get them focused. You know what? Let's put a pin in that thought for now. We can come back to it later if we have time. So even just that little, again, it's a call to attention. I don't like to speak when other people are speaking. And so part of leadership is commanding attention. Sometimes that can be little cues. Sometimes it's your body movements. You really train the people around you that when you move a certain way, it's time to pay attention to you. So that's something that you're using with these expressions. These expressions are the English, the tool, but really the strategy is you're developing a communication style where you make it clear that when you're talking, they're listening and they want to listen. It's an art. This is why I love leadership training, because these are subtle things, But the more consistently that you do it, you not only create a reputation, but you don't struggle as much. And that's really the beauty of it. This really just facilitates your progress. Next one moment. I want to make sure I understand correctly. So I like this one when you want to confirm, when you want to clarify, or when somebody said something completely wrong and I like to give the benefit of the doubt, restate what they're saying to make sure you understood their blunder or their mistake correctly, so that then you can correct them, but from a point of clarity. And maybe you misunderstood something. Maybe they'll realize what they said and fix it themselves. So again, like the body language, I would say here, maybe kind of an inquisitive, a questioning face from a virtual perspective. Because I mean, look at how small I am. You really want to use this virtual real estate to be able to get attention. So if you're just one moment, I want to make sure I understand. No one's going to see that. So one moment, I want to make sure I understand correctly. Is what you're saying, da, da, da. Notice the pausing. One moment. You want to pause there, at least half a breath, because that's when they're stopping their talking and starting their listening. So if you're just like, one moment, I want to make sure I understand correctly, that you're losing your power there. One moment. I want to make sure I understand correctly. Take your time with words that are multiple syllables. So the bigger the words are, don't rush through them. That's also going to give your heart time to calm down. If you're feeling elevated, it's going to give them time to listen clearly. All right, we're getting towards the end. Before we proceed, I'd like to follow up on your earlier point about. So now you know, breathe. You can like physically move up. If you're sitting at the table, if you're at a meeting, like in person, like leaning in a little bit. Before we proceed, don't rush these. Before we proceed, when you're rushing it, that feels like someone who's entry level and nervous, right? Who's like, oh, I don't know if I should say something. But you are now in the higher positions. You're commanding attention. Anything that you contribute in a meeting is valuable. So you want to express yourself from that point of confidence. Before we proceed, and if you don't like the word proceed, you could also say before we move on. So always use the English that makes you feel more confident. No one's going to be impressed by using proceed instead of move on. They will be impressed by the confidence that you're bringing to the table, by how you're expressing yourself, not what you're saying necessarily. Before we proceed, I'd like to follow up on your earlier point about, so take your time. When you're interrupting, take your time. Most people do the opposite. They try to rush in there so that they can interrupt. But for real executive presence, for what, even if you're not a leader, for really good, clear communication, take your time when you interrupt. It's respectful. And most importantly, you are heard, which gives you a chance to be understood. For some pronunciation here, I'd like to follow up. So we've got the reduction, follow up. So we've got some linking there because it has the consonant sound with the vowel sound, the w and the follow up. And then we have another linking here, follow up on. So this is why it sounds sometimes like Americans say everything in one word. It's connected speech. It's really valuable to train. So instead of follow up on, I'd like to follow up on your earlier point. So understanding connected speech really helps you sound less robotic. And I also find it's very helpful for listening skills, because then you realize why it sounds a little different when Americans say things. And so you feel more comfortable listening to them. All right. Thank you so much for coming to this training. If you want some more in-depth training of leadership communication, go to tanyasoares.com/lead and download this free audio guide. Join me next week. I have a bunch of really good tips to share with you. Let me know in the comments if there's anything in particular that you're struggling with, and I can try to develop a training on that. Remember that your English is good enough. Even though you're probably at this level comparing yourself to all your native speaker colleagues or even other colleagues who you perceive have better English than you, your English is good enough. Don't get so worried about having different words at this point. It's always good, but what you really want to focus on is the delivery. Opening your mouth more, clear pronunciation, confident delivery. That's going to go further than trying to create overly formal or complicated sentences. And the good thing is with American communication, we tend to be simple. Even in our emails and our communication, we're very concise. I like to think of it as, whereas a lot of other cultures communicate like paragraphs or even novels, Americans communicate like bullet points. From an English perspective, that's better for you because it's less to say. So it's really working on the strategy. Always think about, what's the bottom line? What's the most important thing that they need to know from me or that I need to share with them? So simplicity is good. Confident delivery is great. And as always, practice makes progress. But for you at this stage, the right practice makes strategic progress. So don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to learn all English in the world. Focus on what's high frequency and high need for you. Thank you so much. And if you want to explore any of my online courses or coaching programs, definitely make sure you get that leadership training. It's fantastic. And I made it audio because I know how busy you are. It's about 10, 13 minutes. Put it on, go to the gym, and really embrace communicating in a way that's going to help you get your point across and just feel more authentic as you develop your authority. See you next week.